Group. So from my experience, and my recommendation is to stay away from this clinic and look elsewhere, because you will definitely get ripped off. I highly recommend and advise to stay away from this clinic, because you can get similar or better results for way less than what I got charged. In this video, I'll be going over how I counted the number of grafts I received after my hair transplant surgery in Turkey, and I'll be explaining how I got scammed by this company, BlueMagic Group Hair Transplant Professionals. So before I went to Turkey for my hair transplant, I got in touch with this company, BlueMagic Group, and during my consultation, they recommended me to go for this package, 2-session DHI method, which would get me full coverage and full results in one time instead of having to go back and forth to Turkey for achieving full results. So I committed to this company, put my trust in them, and I placed a deposit for this package right here, 2-session DHI. After my hair transplant, I received this certificate of transplantation, which indicated I had 5,000 grafts transplanted. And initially, I had no reason to doubt them. I thought it was the right amount of grafts. I didn't have a reason to doubt them. But when I got back to Canada, I couldn't help myself but compare the results with other results on social media and on Reddit. And on their social media, especially the clinic, BlueMagic Group. And that's when I started to realize like the density of my procedure just didn't match the density of their advertised results, which my medical consultant, Berta, had assured me that they could provide me with similar results as they had advertised. So this left me wondering whether I was being cheated and scammed. So I felt like I had to count the number of grafts. Now I had these images taken 3 days after my procedure, where you can clearly distinguish the number of grafts from the original hairs and pick them out and count them one by one. And I counted them using this program, Adobe Illustrator, where you can place a dot, and whatever you place will get counted when you select it, when you hover over it. So for this example, I have selected these 2 layers. Let me copy them and paste them here outside the image so you can clearly see them. These are the layers which I placed the dots on the graft. Now, of course, there was a few that I missed here and there. There's thousands of dots, and especially on the sides where the slope, the curvature of my scalp is, I couldn't pick them out. So there's probably a few missing from the sides. But another thing to point out is this vertex region right here, the topmost of the scalp, would be right here on this image. And a lot of these ones on the outside, a lot of these grafts on the outsides have been double counted. I used the same color for these 2 regions to indicate that, where you can clearly see they have been over counted by a few of them. So whatever I missed on the sides might very well be covered by the ones that I double counted on this image. Anyways, so when I select these 2 layers, I have a total of 2,697, which is nowhere near the promised number of grafts that they had initially promised me. And so even if that wasn't correct, I wanted to make sure, I wanted to account for my margin of error. So I took that number 2,697 and I multiplied it by 20% to account for margin of error. And when you add that up, it's clearly still very far away from the 5,000 grafts they had promised me. Even if I multiplied that number by 25% or 30%, 697 by 30% equals 800, and when I add up 2,697, 3,500, which is nowhere near the 5,000 they have promised me. And there's no way that I missed 800 of the dots here. You can clearly see I picked them out mostly. I picked out mostly every single one of them. In my opinion, if I missed any of them, I might have missed probably 100 on each side if I split this down the middle. So clearly can tell that the number of grafts just don't add up, and that I was scammed for the number of transplanted grafts, which left me wondering like what the transaction rate was for my procedure. And I used the same method to count the harvested grafts on the donor area that I did with the transplanted grafts. Now, these images were taken for tracking recovery and not to document any wrongdoing or accusing the clinic of lying to me. So I didn't have the best images, but these still give me a good rough estimate of what the transaction rate was for my procedure. And another thing to point out is this image right here is the only image I have for the side, but it's pretty much a mirror image of the other side. So I just multiplied whatever I found here by 2 and I added it to what I found here. And see, what I did was I matched this up to a few points here, and I matched it up to these 3 dots right here and began counting inwards towards the center. And I did the same thing here. I matched that up to the outside of this scar right here where there's not much hair growing, to these 3 dots, which are the same as this side here, and I began counting outward towards the side. So when you select these 2 layers, or when you select this layer, you get 900. I got 939, and I multiplied that by 2, which is 1878, and I added it to this layer of the back portion of my donor area, which is 1956. So when I add that up, 1956, I got 3834. So I'm missing over a thousand, almost 1200 grafts that are not accounted for, which just means that the transaction rate is over 30%. So when I get here, let me copy this actually. So when I subtract the number of transplanted grafts from the number of harvested grafts, I get a total of 1137, that's a third. That's like 30%. So if I was to divide this number by that's 29%, 29.6, that's 30%. And this is just a rough estimate. I might have even missed a lot of, you can clearly see I missed a few of the harvested grafts, and I might have even, for all I know, this side might have even more grafts harvested. So the more grafts from the harvested side, the higher the transaction rate, that's 30%. That's a really high transaction rate from my research. And yeah, so even one thing I did was, if I pasted this, if I got this number and I multiplied it by 20%, and if I add that up to the 4,600, which is still, even if they were to say that they harvested 5,000 grafts and blah blah blah, my numbers just don't add up. They didn't even harvest 5,000 grafts, so I'm not sure how they could, if they harvested 4,600 or 3,800, I'm not sure how they could transplant 5,000 grafts. So it's clear the scam. The numbers really just don't add up whatsoever. And yeah, I wanted to make this video to put it out there to make sure anybody who may be considering this clinic for their hair transplant will reconsider and look elsewhere, because this transaction rate, 30%, is way too high. There are clinics in Turkey that probably do under 10% or closer to 5% transaction rate, and they would be charging a lot less than what these guys are charging, BlueMagic Group. So from my experience, and my recommendation is to stay away from this clinic and look elsewhere, because you will definitely get ripped off. I highly recommend and advise to stay away from this clinic, because you can get similar or better results for way less than what I got charged.